Hey, all you rad dads out there.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. So why don't we get started? I'm going to start the way we always do and ask, who are you?
Hi, my name's Keith Negley. I do a lot of editorial illustration, but I also write and illustrate picture books. Um, I live in Bellingham, Washington, which is about an hour and a half north of Seattle. I've got two rad boys, and I just bought a motorcycle.
Nice. Is that first motorcycle?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good for you. So, yeah, you've got your hands full these days for sure.
yeah. It's
How
a good
old are your
time.
kids?
Parker is 13. He just turned 13, and Beckett just turned 4.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess thinking about I don't know with Beckett, but for sure Parker in school, back to school recently, right?
Yeah, he's gone back to school. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice change of pace for everybody, right? Kids and then
Yeah, I mean, I think he even likes it just because, I mean, it was getting pretty boring for a while there.
for sure. Was he out of school last year for some of the
No,
pandemic or?
he goes to a Montessori school, so he was out. They did have remote schooling for a while, but they went back to in-person schooling before public schools did.
Okay.
So he's been doing it a little longer than other students, but I mean, even the summer was rough just because there was COVID even during the summer, so there wasn't a lot of like hangouts with friends and stuff.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of the same for our daughter. We have a just about 6-year-old, so she was in kindergarten last year and mostly in school most of the time, but a little bit of online as well. So yeah, it's been a
How
rough
does a
year for
kindergartner
kids.
do online schooling? I don't
Yeah,
understand.
I know. Even now, she's bringing a computer to school because they're kind of preparing for the possibility of going online, and she doesn't know how to log into a computer.
That's crazy.
So it's interesting for sure. Um, okay, so you're an illustrator author. That's sort of how I came to be aware of you. We've got some of your books. I've got them behind me here,
Yeah.
which is cool. My kids love them. I have two daughters.
Oh, wow. Thanks.
Yeah, and we actually just bought Tough Guys just recently. We had the other two for a little while, but yeah, I think one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is that like I was kind of mentioning before we got started, I think there's kind of some threads in some of your books that really resonate with me in terms of what we do with Rad Dads.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of concepts that you explore in your books. So things like I kind of pick up on sort of that toxic masculinity, gender stereotypes, and things like that. So how important is that for you to sort of include that in the work that you do? It seems like it's a thread through a lot of work that you do, even looking at your illustrative work, some of
Mm-hmm.
the articles you've kind of
Yeah,
done
yeah.
illustrations for.
It's actually not intentional. It came about just because um, I went to grad school. When I came out of grad school, if I had learned anything in grad school, it was to write what you know, which is a very expensive lesson. I could have just gotten online, but uh, that truly is what I ended up doing when I wanted to start writing books for my son, which is how it got started. Because he was showing signs of struggling with a lot of these new emotions he was having when he was like 4 or 5, going into kindergarten for the first time. Um, and I also noticed myself, uh, my dad, I don't know, was born in the 50s or something, I think. So I think our generation of dads, I'm not sure how old you are, Brett, but I'm going to guess you're probably around my age, like late 30s, early 40s, maybe. I don't know.
Yep, 37. Yep.
Okay, so our dads, I feel like, was like one of the last generations to get away with not having to do much other than just bring money home from a job. Um, and I love my dad. You know, he did the best he could, but he wasn't really there emotionally at all. He was pretty shut down. And I found myself doing the same thing. Like, as much as I wanted to not repeat my dad's, parenting style, I was very much falling into that. And I was noticing it, and I saw my son picking up on it, and it just wasn't a good feeling. And so I started to work on a book that ended up being Tough Guy Say Feelings Too. I mean, I wrote
Mm-hmm.
that for myself almost as much as I wrote that for Parker. Um, and so it really wasn't like this is a message that needs to get out to the world, or, I'm going to market myself as like a, whatever, a current events, social justice, whatever woke
Yeah.
author. Like it wasn't like that at all. It was like, this is a book that I would like to read to my kid for us. And then after I put together a few different books after that, and I had enough that I thought maybe I'll see if anybody wants to publish them. And that's how I ended up working with Flying Eye, who put out the first two books. And then I was supposed to do a third book, actually, after My Dad Used to Be So Cool. And Flying Eye wanted it to be in that same theme of, discussing toxic masculinity or talking about emotions with men or boys. And I was kind of done with it. Like I didn't want to, I felt like I said everything I wanted to say about it. And I had that book, Mary Wears What She Wants. That's what I wanted to do next. And they weren't interested in it because it was too much of a departure from the first two.
Interesting.
But I think it's actually, to me, it's very much right in line. It's just coming at it from a different place. It's coming at it from the other side, I feel like. But it does discuss like gender roles and like stereotypes and, the way culture tries to like put people into boxes and, that kind of thing.
Well, you talked about like the role that your dad and your experience with your dad sort of played in I guess your awareness of your approach to parenting, but there's also I think society as a whole, right? We kind of have an issue with that. I think we're getting better, and there's movement to sort of get better and address some of those issues for sure, but yeah, it kind of is just a culture and our whole sort of society that likes to put people in boxes, right? So I agree with you. I love those messages in those books, and I like that you said you kind of wrote them for you. You kind of, I feel that as I'm reading those books, they're for me as the parent, a lot of them, right? Like it's finding a way to talk about some of those things with your kids. Like those are difficult things for them to understand because as they're little, their world is very simple. And as they get older, they hit that 4 or 5-year-old mark, they start to realize it's maybe not quite so simple.
Yeah. It's like, they'll feel, all of a sudden they're feeling shame and guilt, but also anger, and they're scared, all at the same time. And they're just like, what do I do with all this? So it's funny too, because Tough Guys, at the time, I think Parker was like 4 or 5, and all the cartoons that we'd watch on Netflix were like ninjas and pirates and like robots and stuff. And, they were pretty, I wouldn't say violent, but there was a lot of action happening, but you never got to see any of them ever have a bad day.
Right.
And so then or make mistakes in a way that was like, where they actually truly had to like, deal with the consequences. So I feel like, I don't know, that in terms of like watching cartoons, our kids never really get to see what it looks like to be upset and then how to regulate those emotions.
Right.
And so when you look at the picture books that are for the same age group, they're nothing like the cartoons that are marketed for that age. Like cartoons are much more like in your face and a lot of action and a lot of energy happening. And then the picture books are all very like calm and soft and kind of like fluffy. They're very, it seems like publishers are scared to put any kind of real tension in picture books. And so I just found that kind of discrepancy just fascinating. And so that's another reason why, I don't know, I wanted to put together Tough Guys just because I like the idea of putting a book with like all these archetypes, these male archetypes, kind of all frustrated and showing them all having a bad day or making a mistake. Yeah.
And for people who are sort of watching or listening and haven't read that book, Tough Guys, they should go out and pick it up for sure. But yeah, it kind of, each page is sort of a different sort of stereotypical tough guy, a wrestler, an astronaut, a cowboy, like having a bad day, shedding a tear kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because my daughter, I remember sort of a few months ago saying to me something like, well, Dad, like you and Mom never cry, right? Like, why do I always cry? She was having sort of an emotional day and thinking that, when I grow up, I'm not going to have to cry anymore. I'm just going to have this all figured out. And so it's a good tool to sort of talk about that, right? That, everybody has a rough day.
Yeah.
So I love that. Now, you also just recently released a book over Father's Day, a digital book, and maybe
Yeah.
you can talk a little bit about that. Like, getting back to, I guess, the fact that some of your books are kind of, or some of the work that you do is kind of more aimed at parents themselves and how parents cope and
Yeah.
stress of a parent. And so I really loved the book that you put out at Father's Day. Maybe you can
Oh,
talk a little bit about that.
that was, yeah, thank you. That was a fun project. Dove approached me to, I think they must have found me because of the tough guys in the My Dad book is my guess. I don't know. They never told me, but they approached me because they wanted to release a picture book for dads for Father's Day. I don't know, like, so Dove has this, like, I don't know, subsidiary, like Dove Men Plus Care is what the
Right.
company's called. But they do like rad marketing for fathers and men in general, but for Father's Day, they always have some kind of really cool campaign. And so this last year, they hired me to create an entire picture book um, that that they would film dads reading to their kids. And so it was very interesting and kind of meta, and it was so much fun to do because I didn't have any real time to second guess anything. I mean,
Right.
we put it together. I got to write and illustrate like an entire book in like 6 weeks. It was like
Wow.
crazy, but it was so much fun. But so yeah, that book is about it was a way to sort of like celebrate dads.
Yeah.
Trying to think. So much of it was about the dads themselves. So when they were reading it, I would actually personalize the issues, the actual copies that they were reading. So when they got to the end of the book, they'd actually see themselves in it.
Right.
And so that was a lot of fun to see.
So there were sort of like, I kind of watched a promo video of it at one time. And I remember there were maybe 3 or 4 dads or something, right? That like
yeah.
were sort of formed the basis for this. And I remember watching in the video them reading to their kids and the kids being like, "Look, Dad, that's you."
Yeah. That
Right.
was fun. That was super fun to see. Man, that was a blast. And then, so yeah, so it was basically the whole gist of the book was to say, you know, dads care a lot, like about their kids, and it's okay for them to care about themselves too.
Mm-hmm.
Like kind of giving men permission, giving dads permission to also take care of themselves. And if you know, and when they take care of themselves, they can do they're better dads for it. You know.
So, like, how do you identify with that sort of topic? Like, do you think that's an issue? Dads taking care of themselves?
I mean, I don't. It's interesting. Like, I think there is a lot of pressure more than ever on dads to be, you know, that solid rock to like handle whatever storm comes their way. Like we're the first generation of dads to really be emotionally present with our kids to actually uh, raise our kids, which sounds funny, but and we don't have much of a model to go off of, right? We don't have, like, our dads are not, we can't use our own dads. I mean, some of us maybe might be lucky enough to have one of those cool rare dads who actually was invested emotionally, but not many of us do, I don't think. So we're kind of having to sort of make it up as we go, and it's just, I guess I could see it be easy for dads to forget that they also get to have fun,
Right.
that they also get to, you know, take care of themselves and do things that are just for them.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you talked a bit about sort of that book being about sort of celebrating dads, right? And that's, again, that's a big part of sort of what we do. It's, you know, we talk and we sort of share information and, you know, different sort of parenting styles and approaches and things like that. But I think a lot of the benefit is just sort of hearing that other people are sort of going through what you're going through, and celebrating the successes and the wins. And I think that's so important, right? Because like you said, dads, I think historically haven't shared that kind of information. It's kind of been, that's just something I have to
Well,
deal
and they've
with
never been
myself.
asked to, I don't think.
Right.
Yeah, we kind of, like, I don't know, we can get into all that, but I mean, dads in general have been kind of like, they haven't really been expected to do a whole lot in the last, I don't know, few hundred years, I feel like. And I also want to just put this out there too, that I'm fully acknowledging that, the statistics about how moms and women, are carrying the vast majority of the mental
Yes,
and emotional labor in the house. That's still definitely a thing that's
for
happening
sure.
that we get to work on. So it's a very delicate line to on one hand say, dads, you should take care of yourself too. You've got it rough. And then, but also acknowledge
Yeah,
women have it rougher,
for sure.
moms
Like
have it
it's,
harder. So it's like, it's a delicate balancing act.
well, I
Yeah.
think when you look at like some of the organizations out there who are sort of doing research on this stuff, implementing some solutions around things like gender stereotypes and the effect that has on women. A lot of those approaches start with men and boys, right?
Mm,
Sort of starting early and talking to them about the sort of the domestic violence statistics,
yeah,
the vast majority of domestic violence is perpetrated by men, right? And so
sure.
what can we do with our boys, and maybe with young men, to help prevent some of those things going forward? So I agree with you. That's important to say that, in talking about dads, we don't want to exclude moms, but I think a healthy dad um, contributes to a healthy family and healthy children and a healthy community. And so I think that's sort of the importance of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Agreed.
this is the Rad Dad Show. Do you consider yourself a rad dad?
I like to think I'm a rad dad.
So
My kids don't think so, I'm sure, if you were to ask them. But I think I'm pretty rad compared to my dad. I mean, my dad's also rad, but for his age, for his day and age. But I like to think I'm a pretty rad dad.
what's a rad dad to you?
I think a rad dad is someone who like soaks up life. That's a rad dad's like a dad that like celebrates, and is not afraid to show that they're having a blast and that they want to share it with their kids.
Right.
I
So
think that's rad dad.
is some of it I guess, like, one thing that comes up in a lot of our conversations is dads struggling with the loss of self as a
Mm-hmm.
dad when they become a dad, right? And I know
Sure.
that there was an article I was reading, you had done some of the illustrations for, I was kind of just like in doing my research for this a couple months ago when we first started talking about this.
Yeah.
I came upon this article and it was about postpartum depression in men. And
Yep.
that was something that had sort of come out in that article. And I really identified with that, like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got a kid. Like, what does this mean now? And how do I cope with this? And this is something, women are also very much
Sure.
dealing with as well.
Yeah.
But maybe hasn't been talked about very much with dads, is that sort of loss of self. So what I'm sort of hearing from you is bringing yourself and having enjoyment and having fun and bringing that into your parenting and sharing that with your kids.
Yeah, no, I think that's vital. Like, I think particularly, well, just going back to that article, I was so honored to get to work on that one just because it just identified with it so much. When I first became a dad, I think I was 30, and I played in rock bands and I rode around on this like little vintage motorbike, and I was into tattoos and I was an artist, and so as an artist in general, we're very selfish people already. So then to all of a sudden not be the center of my own attention was really hard, and I felt like I had to give all the things up that I liked doing, and put all my intention into this other person, which on one hand is what you're supposed to do, but on the other hand, it was really hard. I didn't realize it till later, but I was like clinically depressed for a long time, and just also like racked with anxiety. Like, as a new dad, you're having like 9 heart attacks a day,
Right.
every time your kid chokes on something or trips. So it was a rough first few years. I wish I had known more then to like seek help, because I didn't know what to do about it, or even that there was something wrong. I mean, I didn't feel good, but I didn't know that was something that could be fixed or shouldn't be happening.
Right. You kind of, there's some like self-blame there, right? Like at least in my situation, right?
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, and also I was the first one in my circle of friends to have a kid, so there wasn't like anybody with me that could be like, oh yeah, that's rough, I went through that too, or
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is how I solved that problem. um, I didn't have anybody in my peer group to like go to, so we'd go to barbecues and I'd be the guy with the kid,
Yeah.
and I was very like self-conscious of it, and anytime my kid would do anything that would bring attention to him, I would get like tense and like, no, put your pants back on or whatever. And it just wasn't fun. It wasn't fun for me. It wasn't fun for my son. It wasn't fun for my friends to watch. Like it was rough. I was not a good dad the first few years. I fully admit that. But going back to just I think it's vital for dads to show their kids having fun. Like, I think it's really important for boys to see their dads acting silly and really having a good time and barrel laughing and, really getting excited about stuff. I think that's something that I never saw my dad do. And it was weird.
Yeah.
And so I think that like just modeling that gives them permission to get excited and show it, to like, to be in a good mood, to like be silly and not worry about getting judged for not being manly enough or something. And to be able to laugh at themselves. I think men, we feel like we're not allowed to, our egos are so fragile. Mm-hmm. We have the most fragile egos. And so, being able to laugh at yourself is like so important. And like, if there's anything, it's like, I try to do that with my kids all the time. Like when they point out, or I do something dumb and or they point it out like, Dad, you just did the opposite of what you said you're supposed to do. Or Dad, you just did this completely wrong. It's like, I try to make sure they know like that I'm getting a kick out of it. Like I'm able to laugh at it and it's okay.
Yeah. I think like your experience is very similar to a lot of dads in that you spend the first 30 years of your life being just all about you. Like, of course that transition is going to be difficult, right? But you're kind of brought up to believe, or, whatever media, society, whatever tells you that, well, you should just like welcome this bundle of joy into your life. And it should be so easy and natural. And, like you're
going to want to give up all your hobbies.
Yes, exactly. Like this is your sole focus in life. And I think like we talked about a little bit earlier, like you having that personality and who you are and showing that to your kids, that just makes everybody healthier, and it models to them that they can have their own personality too, because they'll absorb your anxiety, right? Like I've seen it with my daughter as well. Like the things that I get anxious about and stressed about, now she's starting to get anxious and stressed about them, right? So you do need to be conscious of that. And
absolutely,
it's funny, like you mentioned about like that sort of depression that maybe you faced. I sort of dealt with some of that myself. It was funny, not with my first daughter, but when my second daughter was born.
Interesting.
That was when it really hit me. Like, oh, this is really tough. Like, I don't know what it was exactly. I mean, she was kind of a fussy baby and stuff too, but I don't think that was all that it was. But, and eventually I did sort of seek some assistance for that, some help for that too. It made a huge difference. And just like, fast forward a few years, just sort of this past summer, I was standing around with some of my friends at a barbecue, and it kind of came out that like, oh I started some medication and that really helped me. And oh yeah, so did I. And one of my other friends was saying, oh man, like I think I might need that, and so once you kind of open the floodgates, you start talking about it, you realize, geez, like I'm totally not alone here. But it can feel very isolating.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. Because I mean, obviously as men, if you have to take medication, that must mean you're weak. You're not a full man, or like you should just be able to handle it. Just like, whatever it is, white knuckle it. But no, I agree. Like a lot of times men will, when they're experiencing anxiety or fear, which a lot of times is where the anxiety is like the root of it is fear. it manifests in anger. Just that's the way a lot of men can be built. And that's how it was for me. Like I'd be anxious and I'd be depressed, but it came across like I was just really angry all the time.
Yeah.
And
Me too.
I feel like when you talk about kids, receiving that energy and they're picking up on that and they kind of soak it up. I've been doing a lot of thinking about like what it means to be a man today, like in this day and age. And one thing I've come up with that I think it means to be a man today is it's now our responsibility more than any time before to acknowledge that as men and the power dynamic that just exists in a home, the man having the more of a dominant energy, we are responsible for setting the tone. Not all the time, but we can definitely control a room if we're not careful with the energy we bring in. So just by walking into a room, like the sound of the footsteps we make walking into the room could put everybody in your house on edge if you're not careful.
Yeah.
To acknowledge that, we can physically control everybody else in the house. Like as men, it's rare for us to ever be in a situation where the person we're sitting next to could physically control us.
Yeah.
We're not, and when sometimes I'll get in an elevator with like a really big, a big strong man, and it's a little bit unnerving, like, oh, this is interesting. Women deal with that every day.
Yeah.
Every day they're handling that.
Really,
and it's like, we never have to experience that most times. And so I feel like it's our job to now we know that that's a thing. It's our job to be conscious of it and be aware of it and to be responsible with it.
Yeah. Regulate it and
be
aware of it, I think, is probably the biggest thing, right? It's
Absolutely.
This is kind of fits in a little bit to sort of the male privilege discussion that like,
oh, absolutely.
We could just get away with, stomping around the house and being angry, and that's not fair to anybody, right? Like we have a responsibility to be aware of that, but also to control our emotions, get in touch with our emotions to deal with those things.
Yep, absolutely. And just going back to what you're saying about medication, like I will sing the praises of Zoloft from like the mountaintops. Like when I finally started taking Zoloft, it was probably maybe 3 years ago. It just like radically changed my life. Like I felt more like myself for the first time in like decades. Like it felt like how I used to feel when in college, like before I had kids, before I had anything to like be super anxious about. It's just made me such a better dad. It's made me such a better partner. In general, like if anybody listening or watching this has any inclination that this might be something for them, please search it out. It's made a vast difference. And everybody who's in my life, it's like improved their lives because I'm just a much more relaxed, at ease person, for sure.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that's one of the things people worry about with medication. Well, is it just, is it going to make me not me?
Yeah.
But in fact, for many people, it's the complete opposite. It helps bring you back.
It does. It really does. Yeah.
And
at least Zoloft for me. Not every medications for everybody, but for me, Zoloft, I've responded really well to it.
Yeah. No medical advice here. Go talk to your doctor. But
you've got to talk to your doctor. I'm not a medical, professional.
you got two, anecdotes here, but I agree. Like you said, that article, I'm just sort of seeking it out, looking at your illustrations and seeing what you're working on. And like, I was just like right in on that article. It really spoke to me and, could have been me that article was about for sure. And it got me thinking about, because of the way it was written. So if for anybody listening, I think it was in the New York Times, right? So, go check it out. But it's written from the perspective of the mother in the relationship. And she's saying, our family sort of dealt with postpartum depression, but it wasn't me. It was my husband. And it was like, oh my God, when you think about it through that lens, that like, what was my wife, what were my kids seeing of me at that time? It really speaks to the fact that, like you have a responsibility to deal with this, right? It's like a medical issue. Go deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's
some help. And whether that's
it's nobody's fault. It's,
right.
It's like you caught a cold or, you can't blame someone for, coming down with being diagnosed with cancer or something. It's
Right.
not your fault.
Right. Yeah. So we sort of have touched on this, but I sort of like to ask, like, did you have any fears about becoming a dad? Maybe you talked about that, a lot of the emotion you felt sort of post becoming a parent was rooted in fear. Was that fear there sort of before? Had you sort of considered?
Sure. Yeah. No. Our first son, he was not planned, but we were excited anyway. But it wasn't a planned thing. I didn't know if I wanted to be a dad. So the whole pregnancy was definitely a slow ramp of anxiety until I remember the day he was born. Like, I left the room, the birthing room, delivery room, and I just like sobbed. Like, I just like this release of tension just like poured out of me. And it was I wasn't happy, but it should have been a happy occasion, but I was just like bawling my eyes out. And I didn't know what that was, but I realize now it was just all this tension just getting released because, he came out and he was healthy and everything worked out. Nobody died. But yeah, absolutely. It picked up beforehand. I wouldn't say I was one of those dads that was like picking out the paint colors for the nursery and, just super, super excited. I couldn't wait for the little guy to come. It was definitely like, let's go to the movie theater a few more times before he comes out. Like, we got to get all this stuff done before we can't do it anymore. Because our lives are going to be over soon. I mean, I definitely had the wrong attitude going into it.
Right.
Yeah.
But obviously sort of, I guess, like, do you find that sort of your books, your art, and some of the ways that you explore some of those emotions, you talked about sort of, sharing what you know, has that been helpful and therapeutic for you as well? Or?
I mean, it's therapeutic. I don't think of it as like the sharing part doesn't feel necessarily therapeutic, but putting it on paper is very therapeutic. Like committing it to something like a physical object. It's almost like, I feel like when I finish a book where the themes run across, like being able to express emotions and be like emotionally intelligent, it feels like I'm doing like years of therapy, and then I get to like close the book.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's just a really good feeling. I don't want to say like I've solved my issues or anything, but it definitely feels like it's like a big step forward.
Maybe you've just identified the issues, right? Like writing it down on paper.
Yeah.
Getting it into that physical object, you've identified what that emotion is, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just the jumble that's in your head before that.
It's like I guess maybe it's a way of like either compartmentalizing or putting a face on it. So it's not this, I don't know. Yeah, it's like this mysterious, vague tension in your brain. I don't know.
Right.
I hadn't thought about it like that. I mean, I do really enjoy, I get most of when I do get emails from readers, it's mostly moms, like more than anything. And they're usually like, oh my gosh, thank you. Because this, like, I've got a son and he's like, this book's it's been perfect for him, or their teachers and like, oh my gosh, this book's been so great for the boys in the class. So I thought for sure it'd be I'd be hearing from dads, but no, it's been the opposite.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to the fact that some of these topics are hard to talk about with your kids and hard to find a way to bring it up in a way they understand.
Yeah. Well, even, I mean, I remember being like my dad not ever really saying I love you that often, or like thinking to give me a hug. It was like when dad would give you a hug, it was like twice a year, and it was like, oh boy, it's like, this is my hug for the year. Like, whoa, this is crazy. This is kind of awkward. And so, the more you don't do it, the more awkward it gets when you do ask for a hug,
Right.
So it's like you kind of have to, in a way, like I'll find myself even like wanting to hug Parker, and it'll feel awkward, and I don't like that. And he feels awkward and I feel awkward, but you kind of have to force it, sometimes. And so at the end of Tough Guys, the very last spread, it says like, oh yeah, and these two tough guys and who love each other very much. And I felt like it was important to me when I pictured dads reading that book to their boys, at least at one point in that day, they've acknowledged that they love them or that they love each other. It was like a way for them to do that without it being, like, gave them permission without it being this like awkward, like, oh, I love you. Oh, I love you too, Dad. Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of normalizing that experience, right?
Yeah. Just to say it out loud and be like, oh yeah, I do love you. Like, that's a good thing. This is good that we can say that out loud. Yeah.
Right. Even tough guys can say that.
Yeah.
So what's the most rewarding thing about being a dad? Or things?
I guess for me, the most rewarding times or things are when I can see my boys making decisions for themselves despite whatever their friends are doing, you know, to see them not be afraid to make their own choices and stand out. I'm a big fan of, you know, what's the word, like, not like self-sufficient or anything like that. It's more like just not being afraid to stick out, I guess.
Right.
Because I was terrified of that when I was a kid. I needed to look like everybody else. I didn't want anyone to notice me. And so when I see Parker and he'll pick like some of the clothes he picks are like, just, I would never in a million, he's got a very interesting sense of fashion, but like, I'll never shame him for it. Cause I think it's so rad that he just does not subscribe to any kind of, you know, standard like dressing practice, like in terms of what colors he puts together and what's okay to wear and what's not okay. I just think that's so cool. I just love that. And it makes me feel so proud that to see my boys I feel like I'm in some ways like sort of like maybe I'm being successful at maybe breaking that cycle of being so self-conscious.
Right. So it's like not being afraid to be an individual and not being self-conscious. I think that's a good way to put it. That anxiety about
it's really nice. Yeah.
What people think about you. It's funny you say that. My daughter is kind of the same way. My 5-year-old, she wants to pick out her clothes for school. She comes down the stairs and she just looks insane, but it's great. Like we love it too.
Yeah, it's so cool. When I was their age though, like even at like 6 or 7, like 2nd, 3rd grade, I would have my clothes laid out the night before. Right. They'd all be color coordinated and you know, everything had to be in its right place. And it's so interesting. I was very type A, and like my boys definitely are not. And I'm grateful for it.
Right. That's awesome. Keith, what's next for you? What's on the go? I know you've got some new kind of projects, some that I've heard of. Maybe there's others, but
yeah, I'm working on my next book. I'm super excited about. It's about the very first bicycle, which I feel like is a story that isn't that well known, but it involves like a massive tornado, or not tornado. It involves like a massive like volcano, and like a giant ash cloud that covers the majority of the world, and you know, like freezing snow in June and like ice, like it's the year without a summer. I don't know if you're familiar, if anyone wants to look it up, but the year 1816, it's referred to as the year without a summer. And it's an insane, crazy story that you wouldn't think was true if it wasn't true. But so I'm really excited about that. And that's going to be out, it should be out a year from now, roughly the fall of 2022. And I'm really excited about it. I think this about every book I'm working on at the time, but I really do think it's going to be my best book. So I'm stoked on that. And then I'll have another book. I've got another book that's under works that's after that one as well. But that's too early to spill the beans on that, just because it might change. But I would say maybe that might be the biggest thing on my plate right now. I just started teaching myself how to tattoo, which has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've been following that on Instagram. You do some cool skulls and stuff. So you've tattooed yourself a little bit. But you just did your first one on somebody else.
Yeah, it's not uncommon when you're learning how to do it, to tattoo yourself first. And so, I mean, you start with fruit normally, and then you move from fruit onto like your own body. So my legs from like my waist down to my knees are just covered in terrible janky tattoos that I gave myself. And then once my legs were full up, I moved on to actual real people. And it's been crazy. It's been really fun. It's very challenging. It's way harder than I thought it'd ever be. but it's been super fun. I'm really enjoying it. And let's see. I mean, I don't know what'll come of it. It's just something. It's been really fun to do, and that's all. I'm just doing it because it's fun. So
Sort of a hobby.
yeah, yeah, and that's learning how to ride a motorcycle,
Right.
tattooing people. I got a pretty fun life, Brad. I gotta admit. Like I get to draw pictures all morning, and then I give a friend a tattoo, and then I go for a motorcycle ride and take my boys out to a park at the the evening and get some food. It's like I live a dream life.
Sounds like a rad dad to me.
It's pretty awesome.
Any advice for dads or dads to be out there?
The only thing I can think of would just be, always be how do I want to say it? Like, don't be afraid to apologize. Don't be afraid to admit when you screw up with your kids. I think that's so important. I've never heard my dad say I'm sorry for anything. And I say I'm sorry all the time. Like when you screwed up, go back and say, hey, you know what, back then, like I wasn't in my best space, or you know what, that was a mistake. I'm sorry for that, or whatever. Like, you know what, I did promise I was going to do that and I didn't, and I screwed up, whatever. I just think that's so good for kids for boys especially, but for kids to see what it looks like to apologize.
Right.
And have it be a normal thing. It's totally normal to be able to admit that you were wrong about something. And it took me a while to get there. But now that I'm doing it, it's like totally natural and normal. And my boys can do it. Like Parker, he's like 13 now. And when he screws up, he knows it. And he's like, oops, sorry about that. Like, I didn't mean that, or whatever. And it just makes the whole household a lot easier. But it's really feels good to see.
Nice. I love that. Well, Keith, thank you so much for taking the time
really
to come on the show. It was really fun talking to you and getting to know you a little bit. For anybody watching, listening, go pick up Keith's books. We'll put links on our social media posts when we put this out.
Thank you.
But yeah, I just want to thank you so much for your work and for being a rad dad and for coming on the show.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm flattered, Brett. I'm glad we were able to make it happen. So yeah, thank you very much.